Hey everyone, welcome back to another weekly rundown. This week we're covering May 9th through May 15th, a week that saw continued high stakes developments with Iran, including stalled negotiations and regional responses. President Trump's historic summit in China yielding concrete deals, an aggressive nationwide fraud crackdown led by Vice President Vance and others, and further momentum on redistricting ahead of the 2026 midterms. Let's dive in. The Iran situation remained front and center. President Trump rejected Iran's latest responses as totally unacceptable and garbage, giving the regime's proposals about a 1% chance of survival. Iran's counter focused on ending the war and securing the Strait of Hormuz, but notably avoided addressing the nuclear program, a core U.S. demand. Reports indicated Iran sought to retain some nuclear material, a shorter moratorium on enrichment, and certain controls over the strait. President Trump emphasized no rush for a deal, stating the naval blockade prevents Iran from generating revenue. They agree with us, then they take it back, Trump said, noting Iran's repeated flip-flops. He revealed Iran had previously agreed to hand over enriched uranium and nuclear dust, but repeatedly backed out. Trump also noted that facilities were so heavily damaged that only the U.S. or China have the capability to retrieve the material, and Iran acknowledged this. He affirmed confidence that Iran will stop enrichment and cannot have a nuclear weapon. Regional allies escalated actions, with the United Arab Emirates conducting strikes inside Iran, targeting oil capabilities in retaliation for Iranian attacks. Saudi Arabia also launched missiles into Iranian territory, and Israel surged Iron Dome systems to the UAE. Kuwait and the UAE downed Iranian drones, and the UK sent a destroyer, one-third of their seaworthy fleet. President Trump highlighted Gulf partners turning over intelligence for asset freezes, and Operation Economic Fury intensified pressure. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent reported Iranian oil storage at Karg Island was full, with no loadings for days, forcing production shutdowns and soldiers going unpaid. The situation is being described as death by 1,000 cuts. Iran dumped oil into the Gulf, creating an environmental disaster, and additional U.S. sanctions targeted entities shipping oil to China. President Trump met with his national security team and generals to discuss next steps, and he warned that without a deal, the U.S. would finish the job. A Senate War Powers Resolution attempt to limit action failed again, and it's important to note that Energy Secretary Chris Wright confirmed Iran was only weeks away from weapons-grade uranium. Switching to President Trump's trip to Beijing, which delivered historic results. He was accompanied by an all-star team, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, War Secretary Pete Hegseth, Elon Musk, Jensen Huang, Tim Cook, and other top CEOs, and Trump secured major wins. The visit featured grand welcomes, with President Xi Jinping literally rolling out the red carpet, plus a tour of the Temple of Heaven and private meetings. Key outcomes included China committing to purchase over 200 Boeing jets with a promise for up to 750, and more U.S. soybeans, oil, and LNG. They are also switching their energy reliance from the Middle East to the U.S., agreeing to buy oil and gas from Texas, Louisiana, and Alaska. In return, the U.S. has cleared NVIDIA to sell advanced chips to Chinese firms, opening a potential $50 billion market. Trump emphasized reciprocal trade and the option for Chinese manufacturing in the United States to avoid tariffs. China committed to not providing military equipment to Iran and expressed willingness to help open the Strait of Hormuz and reach a deal. President Xi Jinping stated Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and Trump confirmed Xi Jinping strongly opposes a nuclear Iran. The meetings ran longer than scheduled, and Trump described the summit as potentially one of the biggest ever. Upon return, he confirmed substantial progress on trade and Iran. On to the crackdown on fraud. Vice President Vance, serving as fraud czar, intensified efforts. He sent letters to all 50 states demanding aggressive Medicaid fraud prosecution or risk losing federal funding for anti-fraud units. States like California, Minnesota, and Maine faced particular scrutiny. In Maine, a federal audit found $46 million in improper autism services payments, and while visiting Maine, Vance highlighted Governor Janet Mills' alleged data hiding. CMS Administrator Dr. Oz reported $100 billion in Medicare and Medicaid fraud annually, announcing a national moratorium on new hospice and home health licenses. Dr. Oz also reported foreign governments, including Russia, China, and Cuba, are running fraud rings in our major cities. Hundreds of California providers were suspended, and $1.3 billion in California Medicaid funds were frozen. In Ohio, an auditor found that 40% of the state's home health care dollars were being spent in just 2 zip codes near Columbus, an area known as a Somali hotbed where billions may have been laundered through shell companies. This links back to Representative Ilhan Omar. We've learned her name appears multiple times in an email chain with a $250 million fraudster, including an email titled Ilhan's Office, asking for help with USDA food programs. House Republicans are now moving toward an expulsion vote. Education Secretary Linda McMahon blocked $60 million in fraudulent student loans. The Small Business Administration suspended suspicious borrowers, and a $1 billion Medicare fraudster in Florida was convicted. Last for this topic, Vice President Vance confirmed the Anti-Fraud Task Force is looking into possible criminal liability for governors like Gavin Newsom and Tim Walz if they were knowingly complicit in the fraud. Let's switch to some interesting news related to the handling of COVID-19. A CIA whistleblower testified under oath this week that Dr. Anthony Fauci injected himself into the intelligence community's review process. The whistleblower alleges that Fauci used his influence to ensure that conclusions pointing to a Wuhan lab leak were withheld from Congress and the public. Senator Ron Johnson obtained evidence the Biden administration knowingly covered up crucial COVID vaccine adverse effects and safety issues and intimidated a whistleblower who tried to release this data. Senator Johnson explained they chose an algorithm that masked safety signals and that there's 39,000 deaths reported worldwide associated with the COVID injection and 1.7 million adverse events. Both Senator Ron Johnson and Rand Paul have been investigating the mishandling of the pandemic from the start, and Senator Paul pointed out that although the CIA says the committee has already obtained closed-door testimony doesn't provide oversight. Public testimony provides oversight. By the way, I thought it would be important to note that 0 Democrats showed up to this whistleblower testimony. Of course, the very people who pushed for vaccine mandates, whoring themselves out to Big Pharma, couldn't be bothered to show up because they only pretend to care about their constituents. On to redistricting. Red states continued advancing their maps after the Supreme Court ruled against racial gerrymandering, with Louisiana passing their new congressional map. The Tennessee Speaker of the House removed Democrats from committees after the disruptive behavior when legislature passed redistricting, and Democrats in Tennessee are moving to secede Memphis from the state due to the new congressional map. The Supreme Court invalidated Alabama's race-based districts, giving the state the green light to redraw their congressional map, and Missouri experienced similar actions. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp called a special session to redistrict their state's congressional map, and South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster did the same. Virginia Democrats appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court to reinstate their gerrymandered map, which was already struck down by the state Supreme Court, and the outcome with the U.S. Supreme Court was the same. The map would have been 10 Democrat seats and 1 Republican, but will now remain 6 Democrat, 5 Republican. Shifting to FBI updates. FBI Director Kash Patel reported a 20-point drop in the national murder rate, and the number of violent offender arrests has doubled. The FBI busted a 10,000 student visa fraud scheme in which they found phantom employees at addresses where hundreds of foreign students were supposed to be working, but the buildings were empty or unleased. The Bureau launched a criminal investigation into whether Senate Intel Committee Democrats leaked classified information related to National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard to the New York Times, and it foiled a major terrorist plot that would have been carried out by an Iran-backed militia commander on U.S. soil and Canada. Over 20 attacks were planned, with the target being Jewish sites, including one in New York. Now it's time for the noteworthy tidbits, which are brought to you today by Old Glory. Let me tell you about them quick. Are you looking for a gift for a music lover, or maybe some apparel to show off your quirky side? Old Glory has you covered. With over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture, you're guaranteed to find the perfect item. They even have seasonal gear. My husband enjoys the Beatles and Led Zeppelin apparel, and I love the Billy Idol apparel. I even found items for my fellow plant enthusiasts. This family-owned superstore is known for their quality and customer service, offers free standard shipping on all orders, and orders are shipped the same day you purchase. My discount code gives you 15% off your entire order, and it's currently the best deal available. Just visit oldglory.com and enter in my promo code JADE, that's JADE, at checkout. All right, let's get back to the tidbits. President Trump confirmed he still donates his salary, with most of it being donated to White House preservation during this term. The CDC raised hantavirus response level to 3, but NIH Director Jay Bhattacharya confirmed the hantavirus is not COVID, meaning there will be no lockdowns and there's no need to panic. President Trump announced that after his crews removed 16 tons of garbage and goose poop out of the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool, it will be opening in a couple of weeks. ICE officers arrested another MS-13 gang member who had been in the country illegally for 13 years. President Trump announced the White House ballroom is expected to open in September 2028, and he announced he's going to build the National Garden of American Heroes in the D.C. area to honor our country. FDA Commissioner Marty Makary resigned from his position, and Kyle Diamantis will be placed in the acting position. Representative Pramila Jayapal is facing calls to be investigated and expelled after it was discovered she worked with foreign nations to send oil to Cuba. Los Angeles mayoral candidate Spencer Pratt caught CBS condensing his 1-hour interview into a 5-minute hit piece, and after he called them out for election interference, they released the full interview. Former Representative Eric Swalwell was caught contacting females on Snapchat, some of the same women involved in reporting his sexual misconduct, asking one woman why she screenshotted his chat. War Secretary Pete Hegseth opened a legal investigation through the Pentagon into Senator Mark Kelly for possibly leaking classified information on CBS, and Senator Kelly is now facing calls to resign or be expelled. President Trump confirmed all federal agencies are now required to buy American. Venezuelan whistleblowers have come forward providing evidence that 2020 election votes were rigged. President Trump successfully secured the release of prisoners from Russian and Belarus detention. Prime Minister Netanyahu announced he plans to end Israel's reliance on U.S. foreign aid. President Trump said he's seriously considering making Venezuela a 51st state. Former CIA Director John Brennan confirmed he has knowledge of a legion of resistance actively undermining President Trump. President Trump nominated Kari Lake as U.S. Ambassador to Jamaica and Doug Mastriano as U.S. Ambassador to the Slovak Republic. The U.S. Senate advanced 49 of President Trump's nominees after coming back from recess, including U.S. attorneys. President Trump nominated former Navy SEAL Cameron Hamilton as FEMA director after Hamilton was removed last year under Kristi Noem. Hamilton is known for criticizing FEMA's botched response in western North Carolina at the end of Biden's term. The Trump administration is creating a fertility benefit option for employers nationwide. The Indiana Hoosiers visited the White House in celebration of their 2025 championship. Secessionists in Alberta, Canada have submitted enough signatures to trigger a vote to leave Canada. Ukrainian President Zelensky's second-in-command was charged as a suspect in a corruption scandal involving a $100 million scheme. The U.S. Senate unanimously banned all senators from being paid during a federal government shutdown, which was filed by Senator Kennedy. Attempted Trump assassin Cole Allen pleaded not guilty in federal court, and he faces up to life in prison if convicted. President Trump posted a revelation that Adam Schiff criminally leaked classified information to target Trump while on the Intel Committee. PayPal settled with the Department of Justice over discriminatory DEI lending practices, agreeing to fee waivers for veterans and certain businesses. President Trump announced that Cuba has asked for help, and CIA Director John Ratcliffe met with Cuba's communist government in Havana to discuss a possible friendly takeover or deal. Secretary Rubio said of the situation, "The Cuban people should know there is $100 million of food and medicine available for them, but it's not reaching them because of the regime." In other Cuba news, Fidel Castro's brother may soon be indicted in the United States. Atlas Intel found that AOC is leading in the 2028 Democratic presidential primary. A U.S. appeals court struck down a court's block on Trump's 10% global tariffs, meaning they're back in effect while the case plays out. The U.S. Senate confirmed Federal Reserve Chairman nominee Kevin Warsh, and Jerome Powell served his last day in that position. The U.S. military confirmed the second body of the two fallen troops in Morocco, that of Specialist Mariah Simone Collington, has now been recovered. The two reportedly fell off a cliff during a recreational hike. America's Mayor Rudy Giuliani made his grand comeback after battling pneumonia. He said he feels 100% better. U.S. Border Patrol Chief Michael Banks retired after 37 years of service. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that freight brokers can be held liable if they negligently hire unsafe trucking companies, including those with illegal alien and foreign drivers who violate CDL rules. Cook County, Illinois authorities lost track of 243 criminals, including murderers, attempted murderers, and sexual assaulters, due to a program that allowed them to wait for trial outside of jail with electric monitors such as ankle bracelets. The U.S. stock market hit record highs again. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld broad access for abortion pills through pharmacies or the mail, with no in-person doctor visit, while the case plays out in court. In an effort to defund NATO of nearly $500 million failed in the House. Colorado Governor Jared Polis agreed that Tina Peters' freedom of speech rights were violated, and she will be released from prison on June 1st. Vice President Vance honored fallen law enforcement officers at the 45th Annual National Peace Officers Memorial Service. U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro is seeking the death penalty for the person who killed two young Israeli embassy staff members at the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. And in other news from Pirro, her office is now prosecuting parents whose children violate curfews to participate in city takeovers. Parents could face up to 6 months in prison if they fail to supervise their minors. That wraps up our recap of May 9th through 15th. Another week of results, strength abroad, accountability at home, and America First priorities front and center. President Trump's leadership is reshaping global dynamics and cleaning house domestically. Which story fired you up the most? Drop your thoughts on Instagram or in the comments below, and don't forget to share this rundown with a friend. Thank you for listening and have a great day.